White initiates with a solid central pawn push, establishing dynamic balance and control. This move reflects a sound opening strategy, maintaining equality. Black mirrors White's solid approach, developing a knight to a natural square. This response maintains the dynamic balance established early in the game. White expands in the center with a pawn advance, aiming for hypermodern central control. The dynamic balance remains largely undisturbed. Black supports the central structure with a pawn, reinforcing pawn chains. This solid move ensures the dynamic balance is preserved. White develops a knight, preparing for queenside play and reinforcing central influence. The position remains in dynamic balance. Black fianchettos a bishop, aiming for long-range diagonal pressure. This solidifies Black's position, slightly shifting the dynamic balance. The move the pawn to e3 by White is a mistake. A superior alternative was the pawn to g3, claiming key space in the center, allowing the bishop to b4 with check, forcing the enemy king to find safety, which enables the bishop to d2 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly. This leads to the bishop takes on d2 with check, liquidating material and gaining active play. Afterwards, the queen takes on d2 executes a favorable trade. This allows the bishop to b7, guaranteeing long-term space control. Black activates the fianchettoed bishop, exerting diagonal pressure. This accurate development maintains the dynamic balance near equality. White repositions the bishop to a more active diagonal. This solid move maintains the precarious dynamic balance of the position. The move the bishop to b4 with check by Black is an inaccuracy. A superior alternative was the pawn to d5, claiming key space in the center, paving the way for short castles, significantly boosting piece coordination, which enables the bishop to d6 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly, whereby the pawn to b3 secures an overwhelming positional advantage, unlocking short castles with highly aggressive threats. This allows the bishop to b2, guaranteeing long-term space control. White develops the knight, reinforcing the queenside pawn structure and preparing for further central action. The dynamic balance persists. Black castles, ensuring the safety of the king. This solid move is crucial for completing development and maintaining positional integrity. The move the queen to c2 by White is a mistake. A superior alternative was the pawn to a3, claiming key space in the center. Afterwards, the bishop takes on d2 with check executes a favorable trade. Continuing with the bishop takes on d2, compromising the opponent's pawn structure, whereby the knight to e4 secures an overwhelming positional advantage, unlocking the bishop to c1 with highly aggressive threats. This allows the pawn to f5, guaranteeing long-term space control. Black creates central tension with a pawn push. This solid move challenges White's central control and aims to equalize the position. White resolves the tension with a pawn capture. This accurate exchange simplifies the position slightly, maintaining the dynamic balance. Black recaptures with the bishop, developing a piece and controlling central squares. This solid move maintains the dynamic balance. White castles, bringing the king to safety and connecting the rooks. This solidifies White's setup, maintaining equality. Black develops a knight to a central outpost. This solidifies Black's piece activity and maintains the dynamic balance. White plays a prophylactic pawn move, preventing potential Black threats on the queenside. This solid move sustains equality. Black activates a rook on the open central file. This dynamic move increases pressure and maintains the dynamic balance. The move the pawn to b4 by white is an inaccuracy. A superior alternative was the pawn to b3, claiming key space in the center, paving the way for the pawn to d5, significantly boosting piece coordination, which enables the bishop to b2 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly, whereby the bishop to d6 secures an overwhelming positional advantage, unlocking the rook on the f-file to d1 with highly aggressive threats. This allows the queen to e7, guaranteeing long-term space control. Black develops the bishop to a good diagonal, supporting central control. This solid move maintains the dynamic balance. White develops the bishop to a solid square, preparing for future operations. This move sustains the dynamic balance near equality. The move the pawn to h6 by black is an inaccuracy. A superior alternative was the pawn to f5, claiming key space in the center, paving the way for the queen to b1, significantly boosting piece coordination. Continuing with the pawn on the f-file takes on b4, compromising the opponent's pawn structure. This leads to the pawn on the f-file takes on b4, liquidating material and gaining active play. Afterwards, the knight takes on b4 executes a favorable trade. Continuing with the bishop takes on f6, compromising the opponent's pawn structure. White centralizes the queen, supporting central pawns and preparing for initiative. This solid move keeps the game balanced. Black repositions the queen, eyeing the queenside and central files. This solid move maintains the dynamic balance. White plays a prophylactic kingside pawn move, preventing black's potential piece maneuvering. This solid move sustains equality. Black reinforces the center with a pawn. This solid strategic decision strengthens black's pawn structure and maintains dynamic balance. White mobilizes a rook to the central file. This solid development aims to increase pressure and maintain the dynamic balance. The move the knight to d7 by black is an inaccuracy. A superior alternative was the rook on the f-file to d8, activating the rook on an open file, paving the way for the rook on the f-file to d1, significantly boosting piece coordination, which enables the bishop to a8 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly, whereby the bishop to c3 secures an overwhelming positional advantage, unlocking the knight to d7 with highly aggressive threats. This allows the bishop to f1, guaranteeing long-term space control. White repositions the bishop to a more active diagonal, enhancing piece coordination. This solid move increases white's advantage. Black brings a rook to the central file, intensifying central control. This solid move aims to contest white's growing influence. The move the knight to e4 by white is an inaccuracy. A superior alternative was the knight to d4, maneuvering the knight to an aggressive outpost, paving the way for the knight to f6, significantly boosting piece coordination, which enables the knight to e2 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly, whereby the pawn to f5 secures an overwhelming positional advantage, unlocking the knight to g3 with highly aggressive threats. This allows the knight to e5, guaranteeing long-term space control. Black centralizes a knight, challenging white's pieces. This solid response aims to maintain the dynamic balance and contest central control. White repositions the knight, consolidating the center and preparing for queenside expansion. This solid move sustains the dynamic balance. Black centralizes a knight, reinforcing the kingside and aiming for counterplay. This solid move maintains the dynamic balance. White maneuvers a knight to a central outpost. This solid move increases white's influence and contributes to the dynamic balance. The move the queen to b8 by black is a mistake. A superior alternative was the queen to c6, centralizing the queen to dominate the coordinates, paving the way for the pawn to e4, significantly boosting piece coordination, which enables the knight to g6 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly, whereby the knight to f3 secures an overwhelming positional advantage, unlocking the pawn to e5 with highly aggressive threats. This allows the rook on the f-file to e1, guaranteeing long-term space control. White advances a kingside pawn, aiming to gain space and restrict black's pieces. This solid move capitalizes on black's inaccuracy. The move the knight on the e-file to d7 by black is an inaccuracy. A superior alternative was the knight to g6, maneuvering the knight to an aggressive outpost. Afterwards, the bishop takes on g6 executes a favorable trade. Continuing with the pawn on the f-file takes on g6, compromising the opponent's pawn structure, whereby the queen to d3 secures an overwhelming positional advantage, unlocking the king to h7 with highly aggressive threats. This allows the pawn to h4, guaranteeing long-term space control. White pushes a central pawn, opening lines and creating dynamic possibilities. This solid move strengthens White's strong positional superiority. Black advances a queenside pawn, but this solid move doesn't address White's growing pressure. White maintains a clear advantage. White centralizes the queen, supporting the pawn advance and increasing attacking potential. This solid move sustains the clear advantage. The move the knight to h7 by black is an inaccuracy. A superior alternative was the pawn to a5, claiming key space in the center, paving the way for the king to h2, significantly boosting piece coordination, which enables the knight to h7 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly, whereby the queen to d3 secures an overwhelming positional advantage, unlocking the bishop to f8 with highly aggressive threats. This allows the rook to f2, guaranteeing long-term space control. White repositions the knight to an aggressive outpost, increasing pressure. This solid move maintains White's clear advantage. Black centralizes a knight, consolidating defensively. This solid move aims to weather White's attack but maintains White's clear advantage. White exchanges knights, simplifying to a favorable endgame. This solid move maintains White's clear advantage. Black recaptures with the bishop, activating the piece. This solid move maintains White's clear advantage. White recaptures with the bishop, maintaining strong central control. This solid move sustains White's clear advantage. Black recaptures with the knight, activating the piece. This solid move maintains White's clear advantage. White captures a pawn with the queen, winning material. This solid move significantly increases White's clear advantage. The move the queen to a8 by black is a mistake. A superior alternative was the knight to d7, maneuvering the knight to an aggressive outpost, paving the way for the queen to f2, significantly boosting piece coordination, which enables the pawn to a5 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly, whereby the pawn to f5 secures an overwhelming positional advantage, unlocking the pawn to e5 with highly aggressive threats. This allows the pawn to b5, guaranteeing long-term space control. White centralizes the queen, supporting potential advances and maintaining overwhelming pressure. This solid move sustains the advantage. The move the pawn to a5 by black is an inaccuracy. A superior alternative was the knight to d7, maneuvering the knight to an aggressive outpost, paving the way for the rook to f3, significantly boosting piece coordination. which enables the queen to b8 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly, whereby the rook to g3 secures an overwhelming positional advantage, unlocking the king to h8 with highly aggressive threats. This allows the king to h2, guaranteeing long-term space control. White advances a central pawn, opening lines for attack. This solid move creates overwhelming positional superiority. The move the knight to e8 by black is a severe blunder. A superior alternative was the pawn on the d-file takes on e5, instantly capturing the target to simplify the board. Afterwards, the pawn on the f-file takes on e5 executes a favorable trade, which enables the knight to d7 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly, whereby the rook to f2 secures an overwhelming positional advantage. Afterwards, the pawn on the f-file takes on b4 executes a favorable trade. Continuing with the pawn on the f-file takes on b4, compromising the opponent's pawn structure. The move the rook to f2 by white is a severe blunder. A superior alternative was the pawn to f5, claiming key space in the center. Afterwards, the pawn on the d-file takes on e5 executes a favorable trade. Continuing with the pawn on the f-file takes on e6, compromising the opponent's pawn structure. This leads to the pawn on the f-file takes on e6, liquidating material and gaining active play. Afterwards, the queen takes on e5 executes a favorable trade. Next comes the queen to a7 with check, pushing the tactical tension to its limit. Black captures a pawn on the queenside. This solid move continues to fight, but white's advantage remains significant. White recaptures the pawn, maintaining the material advantage. This solid move reinforces white's strong winning position. The move the queen to a4 by black is a severe blunder. A superior alternative was the pawn to g6, claiming key space in the center, paving the way for the rook to e1, significantly boosting piece coordination, which enables the rook to c7 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly. This leads to the pawn on the e-file takes on d6, liquidating material and gaining active play. Afterwards, the knight takes on d6 executes a favorable trade. This allows the pawn to c5, guaranteeing long-term space control. White advances a pawn, consolidating the advantage. This solid move increases the pressure on black's position. The move the pawn on the e-file takes on f5 by black is a severe blunder. A superior alternative was the pawn on the d-file takes on e5, instantly capturing the target to simplify the board. Afterwards, the pawn on the f-file takes on e6 executes a favorable trade. Continuing with the pawn on the f-file takes on e6, compromising the opponent's pawn structure. This leads to the queen takes on e5, liquidating material and gaining active play, unlocking the queen to d7 with highly aggressive threats. This allows the rook to e1, guaranteeing long-term space control. The move the bishop takes on f5 by white is a mistake. A superior alternative was the pawn to e6, claiming key space in the center, paving the way for the bishop to d5, significantly boosting piece coordination, which enables the bishop to c2 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly. This leads to the queen takes on b4, liquidating material and gaining active play. Afterwards, the pawn on the c-file takes on d5 executes a favorable trade. This allows the knight to f6, guaranteeing long-term space control. The move the rook to c7 by black is a mistake. A superior alternative was the pawn on the d-file takes on e5, instantly capturing the target to simplify the board. Afterwards, the bishop takes on c8, executes a favorable trade. Continuing with the rook takes on c8, compromising the opponent's pawn structure, whereby the pawn to b5 secures an overwhelming positional advantage, unlocking the knight to f6 with highly aggressive threats. Continuing with the queen takes on e5, compromising the opponent's pawn structure. White advances a pawn, creating a passed pawn and overwhelming positional pressure. This solid move sustains the decisive advantage. Black centralizes a knight, defensively consolidating. This solid move maintains black's resistance, but white's advantage is decisive. White executes a pawn break, opening lines for attack. This solid move sustains the overwhelming winning advantage. The move the king to f8 by black is a mistake. A superior alternative was the rook takes on f7, instantly capturing the target to simplify the board, paving the way for the bishop to e6, significantly boosting piece coordination, which enables the rook to d7 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly, whereby the queen to b6 secures an overwhelming positional advantage, unlocking the rook to e7 with highly aggressive threats. Continuing with the bishop takes on f7 with check, compromising the opponent's pawn structure. The move the bishop to g6 by white is a severe blunder. A superior alternative was the rook to e1, activating the rook on an open file. Afterwards, the rook takes on f7, executes a favorable trade, which enables the bishop to g6 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly, whereby the queen to d7 secures an overwhelming positional advantage. Afterwards, the bishop takes on f7, executes a favorable trade. Continuing with the king takes on f7, compromising the opponent's pawn structure. Black repositions a rook, actively contesting the file. This solid move aims to survive the current disadvantage. The move the queen to c3 by white is an inaccuracy. A superior alternative was the queen to b6, centralizing the queen to dominate the coordinates, paving the way for the queen to a8, significantly boosting piece coordination, which enables the rook on the c file to f1 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly, whereby the knight to d7 secures an overwhelming positional advantage, unlocking the queen to d4 with highly aggressive threats. This allows the knight to e5, guaranteeing long-term space control. Black activates the queen, seeking counterplay. This solid move maintains black's resistance within a losing position. White advances a central pawn, strengthening white's control. This solid move sustains the strong advantage. The move the pawn on the d-file takes on c5 by black is an inaccuracy. A superior alternative was the knight to d5, maneuvering the knight to an aggressive outpost, paving the way for the queen to d3, significantly boosting piece coordination. Continuing with the knight takes on b4, compromising the opponent's pawn structure, whereby the queen to b5 secures an overwhelming positional advantage, unlocking the knight to c6 with highly aggressive threats. This allows the bishop to h5, guaranteeing long-term space control. White recaptures the pawn, reinforcing control. This solid move sustains white's decisive advantage. Black centralizes a knight, aiming for defensive solidity. This solid move maintains resistance, but white's advantage is decisive. The move the queen to g3 by white is a mistake. A superior alternative was the queen to d4, centralizing the queen to dominate the coordinates, paving the way for the queen to a3, significantly boosting piece coordination, which enables the rook to d1 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly, whereby the queen to g3 secures an overwhelming positional advantage, unlocking the bishop to f5 with highly aggressive threats. This allows the queen to c3, guaranteeing long-term space control. The move the rook to e3 by black is a mistake. A superior alternative was the knight to e3, maneuvering the knight to an aggressive outpost, paving the way for the pawn to c6, significantly boosting piece coordination. Continuing with the bishop takes on c6, compromising the opponent's pawn structure. This leads to the rook takes on c6, liquidating material and gaining active play, unlocking the knight to d1 with highly aggressive threats. This allows the rook to d6, guaranteeing long-term space control. The move the queen to h4 by white is a severe blunder. A superior alternative was the knight to f3, maneuvering the knight to an aggressive outpost, paving the way for the bishop to c6, significantly boosting piece coordination, which enables the knight to d4 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly, whereby the queen to e7 secures an overwhelming positional advantage. Afterwards, the knight takes on c6 executes a favorable trade. Continuing with the rook takes on g3, compromising the opponent's pawn structure. Black centralizes a knight, improving piece activity. This solid move aims to survive white's advantage. White repositions the bishop, improving piece coordination. This solid move maintains white's clear advantage. The move the bishop takes on e4 by black is a severe blunder. A superior alternative was the queen to a3, centralizing the queen to dominate the coordinates, paving the way for the rook to b1, significantly boosting piece coordination, which enables the bishop to a6 to organize the counteroffensive seamlessly, whereby the rook to b6 secures an overwhelming positional advantage, unlocking the rook to e2 with highly aggressive threats. This allows the knight to b3, guaranteeing long-term space control. White recaptures, consolidating the overwhelming advantage. This solid move seals white's victory. Black centralizes the queen, offering desperate counterplay. This solid move does not alter the overwhelming winning advantage for white. White mobilizes a rook, further reinforcing the position. This solid move guarantees white's overwhelming winning advantage.